All right, we're going to get a little contentious today. As you can tell by the name of the video, we're going to discuss whether one of my favorite characters on Game of Thrones, Samwell Tarly, is a Marty Stew or a Gary Stew or whatever male name you use for the male equivalent of Mary Sue's. But first, I want to briefly give a nod to the fire at Notre Dame Cathedral yesterday in Paris. Very sad. And when I was thinking about, the destruction and all that stuff, I realized that as much as Assassin's Creed Unity was piled on for being kind of glitchy at launch, if people now want to experience Notre Dame Cathedral in all its glory, one of the few places they're actually going to be able to do it is through that game. And that kind of makes a powerful argument for games that have sort of a historical or edutainment component being extremely valuable in terms of historical preservation, because reading about things is one thing. Actually being able to literally crawl around inside a work of historic architecture that might be destroyed. Like, imagine if we could go in and visit a virtual great library now, the library at Alexandria that was burned. Imagine if we could still visit that digitally. And that's why I'm not one of these believers in, this is relevant or this is not relevant, because we never know what's going to be relevant except in the rear view mirror. Things that seem like junk at the time, for instance, Star Wars, which, everybody at the time kind of dismissed as a Saturday afternoon popcorn movie, became this huge cultural phenomenon. And there's a lot of discussion about Game of Thrones in this way as well, whether it's relevant, whether it's not relevant, whether it's the TV show of an era, whether it's the TV show for our time, all this stuff that I just think is foolish. Let's get it done. Let's enjoy it as viewers first. Let's allow us to just kind of enjoy the story, and do all our crazy conspiracy theories and all that stuff. And then we'll worry about its relevance later. I mean, from a business perspective, yes, it was the show that launched the sort of premium cable, big budget drama in a very real way. Some will root that back to shows like Boardwalk Empire or Deadwood, especially Deadwood. But Game of Thrones made it, you could be fantastic. I don't think we'd have shows like Westworld now were it not for Game of Thrones. It really showed that TV viewers would watch fantasy. Now, granted, Lord of the Rings softened people up a lot for that. But the sort of explosion in fantasy shows, even urban fantasy shows, I think owes a lot to Game of Thrones. And I want to give it credit. And the acting's phenomenal in the show. The writing, how do I put this? I don't want to say take issue with it because I don't want to seem snotty. A lot is borrowed in Game of Thrones from a lot of different sources. A lot of the characters are very much tropes. And that's where I get my Samwell Tarly is sort of an oddly powerful, oddly important self-insert character that always seems to be in the right place at the right time and is far more heroic than his innate abilities would really logically cause him to be. He was the first to kill a White Walker, and he cured Ser Jorah's grayscale. And what happened on Sunday night, that if you haven't seen it yet, I won't spoil it, but Sam just seems to do the very important thing that needs doing a whole heck of a lot. And unlike, Tyrion Lannister, who talks his way out of everything, and if he can't talk his way out, well, he spends an entire battle with his face in the dirt. Sam manages to perform feats that he doesn't necessarily have any training for. You know, like just because you've read about surgery doesn't mean you're necessarily a skilled surgeon able to, you know, scrape off 2/3 of a guy's skin without killing him. Things like that. And I don't want to say Sam's a bad character. I think there are a lot of things about Sam that are extremely sympathetic. He's the Samwise Gamgee of Game of Thrones. The interesting thing about Game of Thrones is there really is no Frodo, which was Tolkien's self-insert character. Now, Tolkien didn't have Frodo save the day ever, really. So that takes him out of Marty Stew or Gary Stew contention. You know, even though he's definitely an author self-insert, Tolkien was basing everyone on archetypes or tropes, and Frodo was very clearly the passive hero in sort of the school of Isaac from the Bible. He inserted himself into the story through a biblical paradigm that he identified with. Because, you know, he spent most of the Great War sick as a freaking dog and unable to fight. And so he sort of made that story retroactively heroic through fiction. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. I just wonder if female characters are once again put under too much of a microscope just because there are fewer female archetypes that people can plunk their self-insert characters into as a female writer. And I know that Mary Sue is more of a fan fiction term, and I would prefer it had stayed there. But it's branched out into, I mean, everybody gets on Rey in Star Wars as being a wish fulfillment character, and she very much is. From a cynical marketing perspective of Disney wants 8-year-old girls to buy Star Wars merchandise. But if that's all it takes, a character that is punching way above their, you know, proverbial weight class to get people to feel invested in the show, again, Sam in Game of Thrones serves that very important role of giving the nerds that actually read the books a way in, because otherwise there's really no way in other than Tyrion, who's still very much a ladies' man. He's not like he's exceptional inherently. And the problem with this Mary Sue, Marty Stew debate is there's no set definition. It's just the idea the character is, you know, overly perfect and always seems to be in the right place and seems to save the protagonist in some way. And Sam saves a lot of people in Game of Thrones, an awful lot of people. And then, you know, season 8, episode 1, there was a big moment involving Sam that I think could be argued fits that bill in a lot of ways. So we have, and that's why I'm making this video now, is I think with sort of that moment involving Jon Snow, Jon Snow is the source of a lot of Marty Stew speculation online, as is Daenerys and Arya Stark. All of those are very weird because Daenerys is very much, you know, the fairy queen trope, not a overly perfect self-insert too perfect character. Daenerys has a lot of flaws. She's bonkers. Daenerys has made mistakes. You know, she's over, once again, you know, Sam is used in episode 1 to show a major flaw that Daenerys has. Arya, I mean, she's had the snot kicked out of her for how many seasons. I forget the original trope of the girl that has to pass as the boy. I forget what that archetype is, but Arya comes right borrowed from literature, but as does Jon Snow. Jon Snow is very much the Arthurian hero, the brooding, everyman who actually has royal blood the same way Aragorn was. Dragon Age takes a different take on that, borrowing from the Game of Thrones books with Alistair. So none of those characters really fit the Mary Sue or Marty Stu description. And because I think that's because a lot of people misapply the perfect male when it comes to appealing to a nerd audience. It's not a brooding pretty boy like Jon Snow, who half the audience can't stand. I know I'm not alone in just wanting to smash Jon Snow constantly in the face. He just seems like somebody who everything is just kind of handed to him because he's inherently special. And when I've read, Mary Sue fan fiction, that's not how a Mary Sue comes across. She's horribly understood. She's so much better than everybody thinks she is, right? Bella Swan in Twilight. There's some sort of innate specialness that even she doesn't see, but this wonderfully perfect guy does see it, and so on. Mary Sues are usually perfectly imperfect, which is why Rey fits a lot better in Star Wars, because she's got this childlike body. She doesn't have the, ultra feminine ideal that one would think would be perfected. No. That's not how Mary Sue's roll. She's got to be the girl everybody thinks is a loser, except for that one perfect guy that shows her and everybody else just how special she really is. And there's a lot of that going on with Sam, too, that Sam manages to achieve with knowledge what fighters have not been able to do over and over and over again. And I can see him rising, like they've really set him up to rise to become very powerful in Westeros. And it's interesting. And again, I'm not a subscriber to the belief that somebody who is put in to validate a portion of the audience and happens to be very much like the author. I don't think that's inherently a bad character. I don't think Rey is a standout bad character in a pantheon, the new Star Wars NU, in a pantheon of profoundly underdeveloped characters. I think that the newer Star Wars characters, the problems with them go much deeper. And the issue with Star Wars is really just that there's so much going on and there's so much to do that nobody really gets those iconic moments that the original three films, through their simplicity, had. It's still Luke, communing with Yoda. It's still Luke. Like, despite themselves, those movies continued to be Skywalker's story through all their cynical marketing and wanting to bring in as many disparate demographics as possible into the fold. It is still Luke's story. But Game of Thrones, much like The Lord of the Rings, is certainly shaping up in a lot of ways to be Sam's story, to be the story of sort of the little people, the overlooked people, the overweight kid who everybody picks on because he's overweight and therefore an easy target. It certainly seems like we're heading towards I can't carry it for you, Mr. Frodo, but I can carry you moment for Sam. I think he's one of those characters that he already has a happier story than a lot of people with Gilly, and he has one of the more healthy, stable, supportive relationships in the whole story. Everybody else's relationships are either squicky or awful, or they become betrayed. You know what I'm saying? So there's a lot of, and I'm just saying this for fun. Again, I'm not trying to dump on Sam. I said from the beginning, he's one of my favorite characters. I mean, he's only one of 3 or 4 characters I really care about at this point. You know, I care about Sam, I care about Arya, I care about Tyrion, and I care about Ser Jorah in the way, though I think he's probably prime for cannon fodder, because they constantly point out his old age and how he's, you know, in love with Daenerys, and so he'd happily die for her. But everyone else in that cast could die horribly, and I would not care, because they have been so obnoxious to this point. They have so not had their eyes on the prize to this point that I just hate everyone. And I know that's not the intent. I think Cersei's doomed. And I like the character, but I would not like to know her as a person. I can really appreciate... I like Cersei on the TV show because Lena Headey has brought about 200% more to that character than what was in the books. That's why I like the Cersei Lannister of TV. But, you know, those everyman characters, I think, are the ones, and Arya, are the ones that everybody's really pulling for. The ones that people want to have a happy ending. And I think that's probably deliberate when you think about the people who bother to pay for premium cable. They are nerdy people with, you know, tech jobs, so they still spend money on television, and, you know, those sort of tomboyish girls who want to play in that pool too. So those sort of likable characters like Arya, like Sam, and then, you know, Tyrion, who uses his words. He's essentially sort of he doesn't seek out war, he tries to prevent it. They're sort of the ones that the audience cares about. And then the people who care about Sansa for reasons I do not understand. If you want a Sansa video that is just going to be completely ripping on what a friggin' terrible character Sansa is, not because it's a self-insert, because she's this... Every proof that George R.R. Martin is either incapable or uncomfortable writing women. It is possible to write a flat, bad character without it being, you know, a self-insert or any of that Mary Sue type stuff. I can't get the idea that a Mary Sue is not just a poorly written character, but is a wish fulfillment, especially for the author. I think that is an integral part of the definition. But isn't it interesting, and this is where I'm going to close, isn't it interesting that we don't have these debates the same way about male characters that we tend to about female characters? Even though a lot of these sci-fi epics, the director or the showrunner or the author has a clear gets all the things and wins at life self-insert character. In the new Battlestar Galactica, which was essentially fan fiction, because Ron Moore did not create the franchise, Gaius Baltar is a very clear Marty Stew. He even looks like Ron Moore. And we don't have the hue and cry flipping out about how that weakened the series the way we do with Rey from Star Wars, which... I don't know why we're even arguing whether or not Rey is a cynical attempt to get 8 to 10-year-old girls into the brand. Of course she is, but you know, characters like Finn are equally cynical attempts to have black people feel like they're represented in Star Wars, as is Rose, as is, you know, there's a lot of wish fulfillment characters going on. Rey gets singled out because she's the lead, and because for some weird reason, she just triggers people because she got to fly the Millennium Falcon. But I think that I think that misses the point in terms of why we have these debates about Mary Sue's and Marty Stew's and you know, how it creates weaknesses in writing that otherwise would make the whole work better if they just didn't exist. If those weaknesses weren't there, the whole thing would be better. I maintain that the whole Mary Sue, Marty Stu phenomenon is an integral part of why people like fan fiction. And you can dump on it all you want. Those characters are a sign that we need to work harder to include that type of person in epic fiction better than we're doing. We didn't need Rey because we had Princess Leia and she was already awesome. But we do need more prominent scholars in epic films. We do need those bigger guys, though one of the reasons I started going, there's something up about Sam, because with all the rations and with all the physical activity he got as part of the Night's Watch, he never lost weight. That seems a bit odd. That's a rough life. Like, he would have slimmed down. Nope, because then he's not validating to the part of the audience that needs validation. That was my first kind of tip off that something's not totally organic with that character, possibly. And hey, there's plenty of crazy Game of Thrones fan theories. Why not this one, right? But it's interesting. I think that instead of bashing Mary Susan, Marty Stews, we should look at what fan writing is saying about wanting more meaningful inclusion. And in the hands of a better writer, we could get more interesting characters. Sort of the fatherly scholar goes back to kind of Friar Tuck and Robin Hood. There's a place for that. There's no female equivalent. And I know, as somebody who it really helped my self-esteem to see female characters who were built more like me, meaning like out to here on the chest and like out to here on the butt, in the age where Kate Moss was considered the ideal woman. I really know what that does for a person's developing self-esteem. Now, there's an argument to be made for we don't want to encourage unhealthy activities, which is why, I kind of like the fact that, Sam in Game of Thrones and, Baji from Into the Badlands, which is a freaking amazing underrated show that deserved to go more than 3 seasons. Thank you very much. But I think they're important characters in the lexicon just because if you encourage bigger guys to get active, the activity is actually more important health-wise than a number on the scale. If you get out there and you get active and you start doing stuff, then the health will come. And I think our entire discussion about body image and weight loss with men is really dysfunctional. So I think those characters are important, but I also think those similar incorporating a greater diversity of female characters into things is also important. And we hamstring that by discouraging female authors from trying because it'll get labeled a Mary Sue. I mean, there are plenty of too perfect male heroes out there, and nobody complains about them. We are hamstringing women by specifically focusing on female characters that could use more development when there's an entire genre of action cinema of male characters who, let's face it, don't have a ton of backstory or character development. They just cast the right person and they became the shorthand for that character. So I didn't do this off the top because I'm sure people will be furious at me for this for reasons that don't make sense to me because it's a fictional character and this is just for fun. But help support this channel, become a monthly patron, patreon.com/LeannaK, and let me know about the Sansa video because, oh man, that one will be a rant. Thanks for watching. Tune in tonight at 6 p.m. Eastern for Twitch Red Leanna K.